When they came, the sky did not burn. It shimmered. 1,000 silent vessels slipped through the clouds like silver scars across the blue. Every telescope, every camera, every terrified soul on Earth turned upward and held its breath. Humanity expected destruction, but instead, the ships only watched. For days they lingered, motionless, untouchable, studying us as if we were an unfinished equation. Governments panicked. Militaries armed themselves. Scientists tried to communicate. Yet nothing came back, until one quiet morning, when every screen on Earth flickered alive with a single translated phrase, primitive. That single word shook the species more than any weapon could. Primitive. Not dangerous, not promising, just dismissed. Entire nations stopped speaking. It wasn't a war. It was humiliation. To be ignored by beings who could cross galaxies was to be told we didn't matter at all. The message spread faster than light itself, printed on headlines, screamed in protests, whispered in bars. Unfit for contact. Humanity was not ready, not civilized, not worth a second glance. The aliens didn't invade because they didn't need to. They judged, and they moved on. But something in that insult struck a deeper nerve. For thousands of years, humans have been mocked by their own kind, called savages by empires, called obsolete by their machines. Every age had been defined by someone claiming to be superior. Yet never before had that wound come from beyond the stars. In that silence, a question grew. What does it mean to be primitive? Is it violence? Imperfection? The endless noise of our ambition? Or is it the refusal to accept limits? Scientists gathered in hidden labs, arguing not about the insult, but about its meaning. Philosophers called it the greatest test of our existence. The old powers of Earth tried to suppress the rage, but rage cannot be buried. Students painted the word primitive on their walls like a challenge. Children asked their parents why being human wasn't enough. Slowly, something began to turn. Pride turned into determination, and humiliation hardened into resolve. The world had seen humiliation before, the burning of cities, the fall of nations. But this was different. The enemy this time wasn't a rival country. It was the idea that humanity had already reached its limit. And for the first time, people started thinking not as tribes or nations, but as a species that had just been told it would never be more than dust beneath someone else's feet. That thought was unbearable. In the months that followed, a quiet unity spread. It wasn't ordered or planned. It grew like fire in dry grass. Physicists from rival nations began sharing encrypted data. Astronomers formed private channels, combining telescopic readings the aliens thought were harmless. Hidden among the noise, a pattern began to emerge. The ships had scanned everything. Our signals, our nuclear signatures, even the rhythm of our language, and left behind a trail of detectable static, like breadcrumbs. A single researcher, working in an isolated Arctic lab, noticed the pattern repeated at regular intervals. It wasn't random. It was structured, like a test or a signature. When the world saw her findings, debates erupted again. Was it intentional, or merely their technology brushing against ours? But she said something no one expected. They left us a mirror. They called us primitive because they wanted to see what we'd do next. That idea spread faster than the insult itself. For the first time since the ships arrived, the world stopped arguing and started imagining. Humanity's oldest instinct, curiosity, ignited again. If they believed we were beneath notice, then the only answer was to become something they could not ignore. It wasn't about revenge, or pride, or even proving worth. It was about reclaiming the right to define what humanity meant. And so, amid the silence of orbiting giants, humanity decided to rise, not to plead for acknowledgement, but to demonstrate the one thing that no alien judgment could measure, the human will to create. It began with a single whisper between scattered scientists, a dream too ambitious to be spoken aloud in public. We will show them what primitive can do. They called us primitive, but the word did not die in silence. It echoed through every lab, every classroom, every restless mind that refused to accept it. Out of that insult grew something unseen before, purpose. The governments of the world, once paralyzed by fear and pride, began to understand that the aliens' verdict had united humanity in a way peace treaties never could. Competition faded into cooperation. Scientists who once guarded secrets began to share them. Old enemies spoke through encrypted networks, bound not by trust but by necessity. Humanity would answer, not with war, but with proof. The challenge was simple to say and impossible to achieve. Do something no civilization had ever done. No conquest, no colonization, but creation. The spark came from a handful of astrophysicists who asked the unthinkable. Could humanity control the death of a star? It was madness, yet the idea spread like a virus. They called it Project Helios, a collective effort to stabilize a dying sun and draw clean energy from its core without destroying it. Every empire before had bowed to entropy. Humanity would try to tame it. Funding came not from governments alone but from billions of ordinary people who donated their savings, their code, their time. Nations contributed resources, but no one owned the project. Engineers in Tokyo worked with mathematicians in Cairo. Coders in Mumbai exchanged algorithms with roboticists in Texas. It wasn't a world effort, it was a species effort. For once, the human race had a single heartbeat. Aliens watched, quietly amused. From their orbiting stations, they observed what they believed to be a doomed experiment by creatures who barely understood quantum fields. They did not interfere, they simply recorded. To them, humanity's defiance was like a child trying to move mountains with bare hands. Yet, among them, a few voices whispered warnings. There is danger in underestimating beings who mistake failure for progress. On Earth, the work consumed decades of human brilliance. The first prototypes of the Helios array failed spectacularly. 3 reactors imploded during testing. Thousands died in what the media called the burns of pride. But humanity did not stop. Every death was carved into the foundations of the next design. Engineers improved containment fields, AI systems rewrote themselves to handle stellar data, and orbital factories built new components faster than governments could authorize them. Every mistake became a lesson, every loss a seed for the next victory. In time, the project grew beyond the planet. Space elevators carried modular sections of the array into orbit. Drone fleets assembled vast rings of reflective material to channel solar radiation. Humanity's fingerprints spread across the system like constellations in motion. The aliens observed this slow evolution and began to see something they hadn't expected: adaptability. Where other civilizations demanded perfection before progress, humans accepted chaos as the price of creation. What no alien could grasp was that human strength did not come from understanding the universe. It came from refusing to surrender to it. The Helios teams knew their calculations were incomplete, their data insufficient. Yet they moved forward anyway, guided by intuition, stubbornness, and a hunger to prove that primitive was another word for unstoppable. When their machines failed, they rebuilt them from scrap. When AI models malfunctioned, they retrained them using fragments of human creativity, music, art, poetry, to help them predict the unpredictable. In their quest to control a star, they rediscovered what made them human. The second phase of Project Helios began in orbit around a red giant near the edge of the solar system. Thousands of ships carried pieces of the array, forming a lattice of mirrors and reactors designed to draw the star's energy inward instead of letting it collapse. It was reckless, beautiful, and terrifying. Earth watched through a million screens as the first ignition began. For a moment, it worked. The dying star pulsed with renewed life. But the calculations could not contain its fury. The light that followed blinded sensors across the solar system. When it cleared, the array was gone. For weeks, no one spoke. The project was declared a failure. Memorials were built for the lives lost. Yet in that silence, something happened. The surviving data streams, damaged and incomplete, revealed that for 0.2 seconds, the array had actually succeeded. The star had obeyed. Humanity had touched the edge of the impossible. That fraction of a second became the proof they needed. The world mourned its dead, but the grief transformed into something stronger. People who had never cared about science began learning physics. Children who had lost parents to the Helios disaster grew up dreaming of rebuilding it. The aliens still called us primitive, but they began to watch more closely, their amusement turning into quiet unease. Humanity, broken and burned, was preparing to rise again. And this time, failure would not be the end, but the beginning of something the universe had never seen. Years passed, and the Helios project returned from the ashes of failure with a new purpose and a sharper edge. The world no longer sought approval from the stars. It sought mastery over them. What once began as an act of defiance had evolved into something greater, a declaration of existence. Humanity was no longer building to prove worth. It was building because creation itself was in its nature. The Helios array was reborn, rebuilt by those who had inherited the lessons written in loss. Every calculation that once ended in disaster became the foundation for a new design. Every fallen engineer, every broken component, every spark of data had become scripture. The second array, larger and more intricate than before, was positioned around a dying star near the system's edge. It was not a structure. It was an orchestra of physics, a symphony of mirrors, gravitational anchors, and quantum cores singing in harmony. Earth watched from billions of miles away, united by a single heartbeat of anticipation. Humanity had learned patience. It no longer rushed toward glory. It prepared for inevitability. The alien observers, once indifferent, now tracked every move with mathematical precision. They recorded, analyzed, and debated. To them, the experiment was a paradox, a young species attempting a feat that civilizations millions of years older had failed to achieve. In the stillness before ignition, one truth echoed across the world. This was not about pride anymore. It was about discovery. The same curiosity that once made humans look up at the stars now pushed them to command one. The final activation sequence began, a cascade of energy threading through superconductive filaments and stabilizers. At first, nothing happened. Then, the dying star trembled. The gravitational field fluctuated, then steadied. The array absorbed the chaos instead of breaking beneath it. For the first time in known history, a star obeyed. The Helios course synchronized with the star's pulse, pulling its energy inward, stabilizing the reaction. It didn't explode. It burned brighter, steadier, alive again. Humanity had achieved what even the ancients deemed impossible. They hadn't conquered nature. They had harmonized with it. The impossible had become real, and the universe could no longer ignore it. Signals rippled across space, striking the senses of countless alien civilizations. The same species once dismissed as primitive had reached into the heart of a sun and rewritten its fate. Across the galactic networks, disbelief turned into silence. The elder species, who measured progress by conquest, found themselves speechless before a race that defied entropy through will alone. The phrase "they stabilized a dying star" became a whisper that spread across empires. The insult once used to mock humanity now returned to haunt those who had spoken it. The original alien fleet that once branded Earth unworthy returned, but not in dominance. Their ships entered orbit quietly, without display or threat. They sought an answer, not a surrender. The transmission they sent was simple: we were wrong. Humanity's reply was shorter, delivered by a single voice representing billions. We learned from you, by being ignored. The silence that followed was heavier than any weapon. For the first time, the aliens understood that humanity's strength did not lie in technology, but in defiance, in the refusal to remain static. The universe watched as Earth stood not as a child begging for recognition, but as an equal. The Helios array pulsed in steady rhythm, casting waves of light that reached the edges of human imagination. That light became a symbol, a declaration across the stars that this fragile, chaotic, stubborn species had done the unthinkable. They had turned mockery into momentum and humiliation into fuel. In the aftermath, debates erupted among the ancient species. Some feared humanity's rise, others revered it. But none could deny the truth. They had underestimated the one thing that no calculation could predict: the human spirit. The same reckless instinct that led humans into wars and failures had, in the end, carried them beyond fear and into creation itself. As the stars stabilized and the array's systems hummed in perfect harmony, the narrator of history changed. No longer were humans the subjects of observation. They had become the story itself. The light of the revived star spread outward, carrying within it a message that no words could express. Humanity was not primitive. It was potential incarnate. The aliens left orbit soon after, their silence no longer condescending but contemplative. They had witnessed something they did not understand, a civilization that did not evolve through peace or perfection, but through relentless imperfection, through its refusal to stop reaching. And as the glow of Helios reflected across Earth's skies, one realization became undeniable. The universe had seen many species rise and fall, but none like the ones who learned to touch a star not to control it, but to remind the cosmos that even fire could be tamed by those once called primitive. The light from the revived star did more than illuminate the void. It changed the way the universe saw humanity. The Helios array continued to hum in silent perfection, orbiting the star it had tamed, a living monument to everything humanity had endured. Years passed, but its glow never dimmed. To the people of Earth, that light was not a scientific triumph. It was a reminder that worth was never given, it was proven. Every nation, every culture, every generation looked toward that brilliance and saw something greater than technology. They saw themselves reflected in it. The old divisions that once scarred the planet faded in the shadow of that achievement. Humanity no longer defined itself by borders, flags, or politics. They were simply one species that had done the impossible. From the ashes of ego rose an era not built on conquest, but curiosity. The children of Helios grew up learning that greatness wasn't about dominance. It was about discovery, perseverance, and the refusal to stop reaching. For the first time in recorded history, progress was not measured by war or wealth, but by understanding. The phrase, "they called us primitive," became a lesson passed down like scripture, not as bitterness, but as a vow. Never stop becoming more. The alien civilizations who once dismissed humanity began to study their methods. The oldest empires sent envoys, not armies. They came not to rule, but to learn how such a young race could achieve what they could not. Humanity, once desperate for recognition, now offered knowledge freely. It was not arrogance, it was evolution. They understood that the real victory was not in being superior, but in proving that cooperation and willpower could outshine the arrogance of age. The universe began to change because of it. An alien historian, centuries later, would describe the event in simple terms. They did not ascend through perfection, but through persistence. They burned, broke, rebuilt, and in the process, taught the stars humility. In their chronicles, Earth was no longer a backwater world. It was the birthplace of resilience. Helios became more than a monument. It became a pilgrimage site for civilizations across the stars. They came to see the star that humanity had saved, and with it, to understand what drove these strange beings who refused to give up even when reason demanded they should. Back on Earth, a new philosophy emerged, a belief that life itself was a series of impossible challenges meant to be faced, not feared. The people no longer saw themselves as fragile creatures clinging to survival. They saw themselves as the architects of meaning in a silent universe. The old fear of insignificance vanished. Humanity had proven that existence alone was not enough. It was the act of creation that defined worth. Every new generation built on that foundation, pushing the frontier of science, art, and thought further than their ancestors could have dreamed. And still, the Helios array burned, whispering across space a message that needed no translation. It spoke of the unyielding spark within those who once crawled from the dirt to touch the heavens. It reminded the cosmos that to be human was to struggle, to fail, to rise again, and to find beauty in the very act of defiance. The aliens who once pitted Earth now revered it, calling humanity the keepers of fire. Centuries later, when new civilizations emerged, They would learn of the day when a world once mocked as primitive chose to challenge entropy itself. The legend of Helios would spread as both warning and inspiration, that even the smallest spark, when driven by will, can rewrite destiny. The greatest truth humanity ever learned was that weakness was not the opposite of strength. It was the foundation of it. Every failure, every scar, every loss was a step toward the impossible. As the light of the stabilized star reached the edges of the galaxy, a final voice echoed in countless tongues, carried by the networks of every species that watched in awe. It said, "They called us primitive until we did this." And with those words, humanity's story became eternal, a story not of conquest or dominance, but of endurance. The universe did not remember them for being perfect. It remembered them for being unstoppable. And as long as that star burned, so too would the proof that even the smallest beings could ignite the fire that teaches the cosmos what it means to be alive.